Well, let's put it this way. Um, let me put it in terms of this year's election, okay? Just to, because we can see clear neurosis of the American populace right now, okay? Which is two sides, okay? Too much of the animal distorts the civilized man, too much civilization makes sick animals, okay? And so um, we have one side of the electoral um, process this year that is heavily on the civilization side, and we have one side that's on the animal side. Okay, Donald Trump has come out in various speeches and he says very outrageous things, and people say, "How can he get away with that?" And what he's doing is getting through to our unconscious. Okay, because all of us were put down by our um, principal or teacher or somebody during our growing up time. And um, we all have an experience of resentment. Please, if you're a psychologist and you know more about this than me, speak up, okay? But this is my interpretation of it. I'm a layman, so um, and so we all have um, these things that got repressed when we were growing up and learning how to be human beings. And they get repressed and they get pushed down into our unconscious. They don't go away. Okay. And so basically, what Donald Trump has been doing is saying outrageous things and getting away with it. And so the unconscious of a lot of people is coming up and it's saying, yeah, okay. I mean, you're seeing that. You see that at a lot of his rallies, actually. People are saying, yeah, okay. And so, so he, to me, he represents the unconscious side of, of the psyche. And if, if he is elected, then we're going to have a lot more acting out in this country over the next 4 years at least. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's nonetheless going to happen. Okay, and I didn't bring my red book this week, but recall last week when we were um, reading, I read the part about Satan being held in held at abeyance for 1,000 years by Christianity, so fundamentally in terms of Europe and World War One, and Revelations in the Bible actually says this, that Satan will be kept away for 1,000 years, and then you'll have to let him out for a season. Okay, it's actually predicted in Revelations, and what Dr. Jung said in the Red Book was. Um, you turned him into a fairy tale, okay, Satan into a fairy tale. And, but when the ugly great one raises his head, everybody, it, coldness draws near, I think is the way he put it, something like that. And so our civilization is a veneer, a thin veneer. Okay, we actually build it up and have built it up over thousands of years in every part of the world. And if we tear it down and disrespect it, um, then it's going to be torn down. It happened in Germany, and it can happen here. And it's almost literally unstoppable if it doesn't get stopped. And that's what they found in Germany, because one of the issues that Jung talks about a lot is herd mentality, and he talks about the idea that 100 brilliant minds in a room make one fathead. That's what he said. And the reason is because if you get two people in the room, or we have 9 people in the room tonight, and everybody listens to what Skip says and they say, and no one else speaks up, then next week I can say whatever I want, and you'll just say, and more people will come, and a bigger group will be here, and pretty soon I'll have a herd that I'm leading, but nobody is challenging me. And Dr. Jung was very adamant that it is the individual that saves society. It's not a group, okay? It cannot be a group. But his point in this first meme is that it's a balance, okay? Because if you have too much civilization, you have sick animals, is what he said, is the way he put it, okay? Too much civilization, if we, you know, beat up our kids so that they're the perfect little cherubs, okay, they may be perfect little cherubs through their school years, but once they get out from under your thumb, they might be psychopaths. Okay, they could be. Okay, because their unconscious is working against them. Okay, so what do we have here in the election? We have this civilization versus instinctuality that's coming up, and it's being put together in. Jung would call it an alchemical vase, namely the American election in November. And we're going to see what the result is. Okay, that's what alchemy was really all about. And up until now, the meaning of America has been that we can all be different, and yet we can all work together. You know, I served in the Marine Corps, and so, you know, I never thought about the politics of my fellow Marines. I mean, I was trained, I was serving the warrior archetype at that time, and I never thought about the politics of my fellow Marines, never. And I'm convinced that every veteran knows what it means, knows why they were there, and would be there, you know, if I could find a politician who had any military experience, I feel sure that if we came to crisis, he and I could serve in the same trench together, regardless of his political position, okay? And in psychology, in Jungian psychology, this is called a rebus, okay? Do you use this term rebus in your practice? Do you use it? No. Do you know what it is? What I'm talking about, rebus, is something that goes back to Heraclitus, and it relates to every relationship we have, including here. We have some sort of relationship from last week, and over time that will change and build, and this class will change and build over time, and it happens in marriages. Okay, and Billy Joel had a song that was really about the breakup of his marriage with Christy Brinkley, but he said, and so it goes, and so it goes, and you're the only one who knows. Okay, so the five of us that were here last week, we're the only ones that know what happened last week and what the interaction was in the group. And it happens in every group. I mean, I'm a Marine, and I couldn't possibly describe what it's like to be a Marine. It's a unique thing. And my fellow Marines are the only ones that know, okay? I could describe it to you till I'm blue in the face, but you would never grok it. It's true in marriages, it's true in everything. It's true in personal relationships. Right, okay. And there's always opposites working at work. For example, in a marriage, my favorite joke between my wife and I is, if a man is in the woods and he says something but no woman hears him, is he still wrong? Okay. And yes, he is.
It's not experienced.
Pardon?
Well, Jung might challenge that because he talks about whether or not it's experienced. If it isn't experienced, it's irrelevant. These are my interpretations of it.
Right.
But I wanted to go back to his comment.
Sure.
Because that's really the million-dollar question.
Okay.
You know, how, and he and Adler and Freud were buds, you know, of course.
Right.
Freud got pissed off. And it was said that the hysterics and the unconscious people went to Freud, and Jung liked to take the really aware people who were conscious or interested in becoming conscious, and then they sent the others to Adler. They didn't know that. I think I'll said somewhere. But in his groups, he used to meet with people at his Swiss home, and his goal, he said, was to become conscious. Our goal is to become conscious of who we are. That's why he did the mandalas. That's why he used all the learning about self. And he was big on the superego and sort of rules that we grow up with and we learn. So we're kind of consciously developing how do we behave, what do we do. The unconscious comes in whenever we have any reaction to anything, any strong reaction, that's telling us, or even upsetness or a moment of just whatever.
Emotion, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up polarities because he's big on polarities, because although we would say that this political arena has brought up an extreme polarity, we're going to also see another pole. We're seeing a lot of people look at, examine, even people who would have normally known who they're going to pick by now, don't know who they're going to, I mean, we're getting all kinds of things we've never come across before in a positive sense too, because you can't have the negative and vice versa.
And so what we have is we're coming into consciousness in this election process about what we are as Americans, okay, in general. And in November, we're going to find out what we are, okay, and that's going to be the new thing, the third thing. So there's a conscious aspect that we already thought we knew 2 years ago. There's an unconscious aspect that all of us have been surprised with one way or another, okay, and both sides, okay, I'm not saying it's one side or the other, both sides, but there's new consciousness coming out, but it's still in this opposite thing of R&D, and so in November we're going to learn what it means to be American again, and will that be a good thing? I don't know. I mean, it could be that the election of Donald Trump will cause so much roiling in the system that it will actually be a good thing. I couldn't say. I'm not going to vote for him, but it could be that it would be. The answer to that is wholeness. Okay. Dr. Jung was talking about the two sides. Think of it as a circle, and here you have the unconscious, and here you have the conscious. And if you don't have both sides integrated, you're not yet whole as an individual. And so one thing Dr. Jung used to say is, bring me a normal man and I will fix him for you. Okay, now what he meant by that was a normalized man, okay? The kind of man who's had things repressed and resents it, or woman too. I mean, women have had plenty of things repressed and resent it.
You're perfect.
And I mean, this is my interpretation, okay, and it's based on long experience. I mean, I don't claim to be a...
But if it's a bad repressed thing, like Freud was saying, murder the father and marry the mother sort of thing, to recognize that is apparently beneficial by bringing it into our conscious, but obviously we can't act on it.
Well,
So
that is
really,
the point. Then it comes down to morality, right?
Well,
Okay.
that's actually it's a really good therapy issue. It comes up actually pretty frequently in therapy.
Yeah.
And that is that when people respond unconsciously to whatever stress they've been presented with, it really is the result of responding unconsciously is not usually a very healthy or positive response.
Mm-hmm.
Ignoring that, though, and just responding cognitively and doing the moral thing or the right thing or whatever, is to ignore whatever the repressed feeling is about. So it's very helpful to open up that repressed feeling and talk about, perhaps what happened or where you are with that, and begin to work toward what is a response that takes care of whatever's been repressed, but is a good match for who you are today.
Exactly.
I don't think that it is a polarity between conscious and unconscious, or the conscious and the shadow.
Mhm.
I think one is sort of nested in the other. The shadow and the ego might be a polarity of sorts,
Mhm.
but the idea of putting consciousness and the unconscious as a polarity wouldn't work. And then you got the collective unconscious under that. So I think you're looking more at a nesting structure rather than a polarity until you get up into the consciousness itself. And then because you're dealing with language and other things that have these, kind of differential play of
Mhm.
signifiers and that sort of thing. It's a structural thing that reflects and that polarity and builds it out.
Yeah. Both Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung did draw a picture of what you're talking about. And I'll see if I can find one to bring in next week. And, my answer is not a definitive answer, okay? I don't claim to have a definitive answer, nor did Jung ever really.
I don't know who would.
Pardon?
I don't know who would have
Right.
a definitive answer.
Right. And because Dr. Jung said, the unconscious is really unconscious, and we don't know a lot of what's in it.
Right. The dream.
Right.
One way it perks up.
Well, it's one way to get through to it, but you really don't know where it's going. Go ahead.
I just had an interesting symbol pop in my head of, like, if you think of an ocean that's just completely dark, and your consciousness is like a little beam, just shining out a little piece of that ocean a bit at a time, and your attention might be shifting all over the place, and it might be connected in some way,
Mhm.
but because you don't know how big that ocean is.
Exactly.
It's like you're only
Right.
conscious of a little bit at a time until it's connected to everything else. Until you have
Right.
enough of the unconscious that you start to understand every
That's
little
right.
bit that comes up. You're like, oh, now I understand how that's connected or why that's
Yeah,
repressed.
I think it's about understanding.
Yeah.
It's not like the shadows, they maybe have a negative connotation, but if you understand that those are your shadows, and you understand that they may drive your behavior and how you feel about things, that's when you become more whole, and it helps you to know those shadows and let them come up, and then work with them and say, okay, I see it, I don't like it, I'm gonna pay attention, work with that. So I think that's the point of bringing up the shadows.
But it's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? And the distinction that ultimately or started to emerge between Freud and Jung was that Freud wanted to make a dogma of sexuality being libido, and what Jung says is that libido is really psychic energy, which is where Harding finally went with it 30 years later, and actually wrote the book called Psychic Energy.
Esther Harding.
Pardon?
Esther Harding.
Esther Harding, yes. Okay, I
Good or
think
bad?
I
Maybe
I
I'm
think you're
judging
I think you're
something, but-
struggling with the issue of morality. Okay,
Okay.
and we have let's take in Christianity. There's the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not do this. Thou shalt not do that. And those are good as far as they go. But in terms of what Harding is talking about, the development of the psyche and the transformation of the psyche toward maturity, those fall into the first phase. In Buddhism, the man of little intellect, okay, which is all karma. And so you do something bad, you're going to get punished type thing, okay? But we're not going to get very far as a society if we're always relying only on cause and effect, okay? We have to be smarter than that. It's very interesting. passage in a movie called 13 Days, which is about the Cuban Missile Crisis. And President Kennedy has been in an argument with the Joint Chiefs of Staff about what to do, and he says, "Well, I'm not really worried about the first consequence, or even the second or the third. I'm worried about the sixth consequence, and whether there's going to be anyone here to even make a decision." Okay, that was his point. And so something happens like the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yes, it's going to cause an effect. It has a cause and it's going to have an effect. But you know, the generals want to you know, are always a little trigger happy, okay, because they have these toys and they always want to use them. Okay, I'll tell you an anecdote. In 1962, I was 15 years old and I moved to Japan. My father took me down on the pier in Yokosuka, the headquarters of the 7th Fleet one time, and showed me a line of ships going out of Tokyo Bay. And he said, "Do you see that, Skip?" And I said, "Yeah, Dad." And he said, "That's the Marines. They're going to Vietnam. Everybody in the military has either been to Vietnam." This is 1962 now. We didn't officially go into Vietnam until 65. But he says, everybody in the military has either been to Vietnam, is there now, or is going there. And I said, "What?" And I said, "Why, Dad?" And he said, "Because the generals need a war for their careers. And if they don't have a war, then people can't make rank in the military." And Dr. Jung was talking a lot about how the bulwarks that we put up to protect society, civilization, had started to fall away. And he talked about this a lot in his Zarathustra lectures, because Nietzsche made this statement right at the beginning of Thus Spake Zarathustra, that God is dead. Okay, because at the end of the 19th century, the bulwarks that were there were all these Victorian-style men who were going around pretending they were paragons of the community, and then they were going out the back with prostitutes and whatever. I mean, even Lord Randolph Churchill, you know, he caught syphilis on the night before his wedding. That the institution of marriage doesn't necessarily serve us. I mean, we can say, "Oh my God, you've got to stay in your marriage and you can never have a love affair, and boy, if you do, you're out." But then you're out, and then you don't have a marriage anymore. And so the question is that better? We have 50% divorce rate in the United States right now. And so would it be better if we understood that we're transforming psychologically throughout our lifetime? We don't teach people how they are going to transform.
Right.
Okay, and so that's what this meme is about. That, you know, the first half of life is devoted to forming a healthy ego, and the second half of life is going inward and letting go of it. And so all of Jung's oeuvre ultimately points back to individuation, and it all points back to wholeness, which is what this is. And so I brought this along today because I got this at a used on Amazon. They don't have them new anymore, but there are many booksellers out there through Amazon that you can buy them from. And so I was able to get myself one, and you can see all the color plates in here, and there's a lot more color plates than in the black and white version. that's in this book. I mean, this version of it. The words are the same, but this is a lot more meaningful. So I'll pass this around. And one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a Dropbox, okay, for this class.
Or just
Here's my vision, okay? And you know, this may not be your vision, and it may not be everyone's vision, but Dr. Jung talked about Thus Spake Zarathustra for 5 years, okay, and 86 lectures. And the book itself is like 200 pages long, but his lectures are 1,600 pages, and they were all transcribed. And so I've come I think that I've come fairly deeply into Dr. Jung's work. You know, people can have different opinions of that. and so I'm 70 years old. I want to share some of that. I've been studying it for 30 years now, independently, by myself. And, you know, I'm involved in various Jungian groups. However, I'm not officially a Jungian. I don't claim to be a psychotherapist, but what I do know is that his work has helped me quite a lot. And so I want to go through the various books and through some of the books about his work. And that's actually described on the meetup. And just see what we learn from one another. And I don't claim that I have all the information. I mean, we have professional psychotherapists here, so I don't claim to be a psychotherapist, and there's not going to be psychotherapy conducted during this meetup ever. You know,
at least not consciously.
no, not in. I mean, obviously, whenever there's a conversation between two human beings, there's some sort of therapy going on, and we can't change that. But you know, I want the psychotherapists in the room to speak up if you think we're doing anything wrong here, because I don't propose to conduct psychotherapy here. I mean, if people see a psychotherapist here and want to speak to that person, I'm all for it. Okay? Either before or after the class, that's great. And what I believe is that if we talk about the various, I mean, there's more than 20 volumes in his collected works, and they're incredibly dense in terms of the content. I'll bring his letter to Dorothy Thompson next week as a handout, and you'll see that just that one letter, 4 pages, we probably could talk about it for a month. And so what he did through the 30s in 86 lectures was he really talked about his fundamental thinking of psychology, and again circumambulating the center. And those lectures were all for his closest followers. Okay, they were all psychotherapists in that group, and there were about 25 of them. They met once a week for that. Well, they actually did it for about 3 decades, but the Zarathustra part of it was 5 years, and so that's what I'm proposing to do. I mean, I was originally thinking of doing it as a lecture, but then I have a psychotherapist friend in South Africa who said that she's been in a Jung reading group for 15 years, and they've been meeting regularly for 15 years. And she said at the maximum they had 8 people, 4 of whom were therapists, and at the minimum it's been 4. But I think when she started 15 years ago, she didn't have meetups, so God knows what this could turn into. I mean, we've had 8 each week, but we have 4 new people tonight. So, you know, I just don't know what it will be. Whether, you know, you've come a second time, so that's encouraging. So first we're going to plow through this sucker, which is the first level, the highest level of understanding, or the lowest level of understanding. And then I propose next, but we can vote on it. I don't mind voting about what we talk about next, but I think we ought to do Memories, Dreams, Reflections, which is his pseudo-autobiography, because it has a bunch of profound things in it. And I've gotten that on audible.com, and the reading of it is terrific, honestly terrific. I've been reading it for like a third time in the last week, and I highly recommend it.
Now, why do you call this pseudo-autobiography?
Well, because he did not believe in biography per se. He didn't want to have a biography of the history of his life. And so what he wanted was a biography of the transformation of his own psyche. That's what he wanted in his biography. And so, one of the very early things, his father was in fact, I almost am regretting that we didn't start with that. But, I mean, this does have some fundamental things that we sort of have to get through. But one of the very early things is that his father was a pastor, a Swiss Reformed pastor, and he had lost his faith. And when he was 11 years old, he had a thought that he knew was coming, but he didn't want it to come. It's like, I'm going to force this down. I don't want this to come up. And suddenly he had a vision, and the vision was of a colossally sized God shitting on the Basel Cathedral. Okay, literally.
This was Jung who had that, or is
Jung himself, when he was 11 years old,
okay.
had this vision of God squatting over the Basil's Cathedral and dropping a turd on it. Okay, literally, that was one of his early visions, and I don't really want to get into it too much beyond that right now. Okay, and one of the things I'm trying to avoid doing right now.
Jumping ahead.
Well, I'm trying to avoid getting into the religious aspects of Jungian work. Okay, and he was definitely into spirituality. He was not. He's often accused of mysticism, so-called mysticism. And in fact, there's a book you can buy at Barnes & Noble called Jung the Mystic. Okay, well, that's a psychotherapist who wants to sell books, right? Jung the Mystic, okay, what does that mean? But Jung was not a mystic, okay? He was an empiricist, and he said, what people don't understand is, I believe the psyche is real. Do you believe the psyche is real? Of course you do. You couldn't do your work without believing that, okay? Right. And so he believed that it was real, and so when he, for me, I felt like a great weight had been taken off my shoulders when I was reading Answer to Job, and I got to paragraph 752. And in the middle of that paragraph, it's quite a dense paragraph, but in the middle of it, he said, every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche and not a statement of the physis. And he said, if it were not so, they would be in the books of natural history and textbooks about biology and whatever, but they're not. They're psychic facts. They are not physical facts. And every religious statement is like that. And so, all of a sudden a light bulb went out or on, and it's not about looking for God. We have the Hubble telescope. We can look all the way back to the Big Bang now, and we can look down to the smallest particle the God particle, God wasn't there, right? And so atheists are right about that. In the physical world, these things are not there. But God is within people. Some people, I mean, take name your flavor and whatever. But it says that religion, I mean, things like virgin birth. Okay, yeah, there's no virgin that had a baby. But on the other hand, in the physical world, and that's one of the things that atheists will ha ha about. But in the psyche, it can happen. Okay, and next week I have to bring my poem. But anyway, so he wrote a lot about this, and it's a mystery. I mean, think of the movie Shakespeare in Love. Okay, so in Shakespeare in Love, Shakespeare's walking along and he's got Geoffrey Rush next to him, and he says, "Boy, I'm really worried that the theater won't open on time." And Geoffrey Rush says, "Don't worry, it'll be all right." And Shakespeare says, "How will it?" And he says, "I don't know, it's a mystery." Okay? And the point is that we do have mystery in life, and we need it, and it's in the psyche. And that's what Jung was addressing. Okay? And it's undeniable. I mean, it's there. There's mystery, and plays do come together. They happen every time one is scheduled. The play goes on.
Goes on,
Right. But I'm reluctant to get into that until we build a stronger rebus in the group. Okay, so that none of us are threatened by it. But okay, we sort of didn't get into all these things, but let me just talk through this list here. Archetypes. There's a Facebook page I created called Jung for Laymen, and I created that Facebook page. And at first I started to just do lectures at home. And so I did 3 lectures. One of them is on archetypes. One is on individuation, and one is on personality types. And so if you want to go look at those lectures for what they're worth, fine. I intended to do it very informally because my whole purpose is to make Jung approachable to average people so they're not bouncing off.
Skip, are all these subjects in this book?
Um,
Any symbols? Because I don't remember psychic energy, but I only read the Jung part of the book so far.
Right. I don't remember psychic energy, and psychic energy in here is probably referred to as libido.
Oh.
Okay. And
Are they,
it was
synonymous?
only when I got to Harding, which is this year, that I realized that that's what they're talking about, and that the opposites represent the polarity that creates this energy that causes things to happen. Okay.
Yes, he talks about a gradient from the.
What for psychic energy?
Yes.
Okay, so his favorite example was a waterfall, where water, the transformation takes place. It's a cycle. Water evaporates up into the sky, it then rains down and comes back down to the sea, and it gets in a river and hits a precipice, and it comes down. And there's energy in that whole process. There's energy on the way down in the form of what happens with gravity, and there's energy going up in the sense of evaporation. And that never stops. Okay, that's kind of an opposite. Okay, there's the energy of the heat of the sun versus the energy of gravity, and it renews itself constantly. And so that's ultimately, I think, what he was talking about. And that's basically what Harding says in psychic energy, to me anyway.
Well, that's sort of a metaphor. I mean,
It is a metaphor. It's all a
I mean,
metaphor.
it's all a metaphor, yeah. But I think he's talking about the circulation of psychic energy, which which energizes all of these structures he talks about, all of these, and makes
Everything.
manifest all these kinds of awareness or lack of awareness, but it's the dynamic that runs the whole machine.
Right. I mean, the energy between masculine and feminine. Okay, there's more energy in this room because there's both men and women in the room than there would be maybe if it was all men or all women. It would be different energies, maybe.
For sure.
Okay,
Hopefully
and
so.
there's no limit to the number of opposites there are, right? I mean, we're only talking about the very gross big ones, but so let me just address collective unconscious is what all of us know. Okay, we're all American. We know what it means to be an American. Okay, now if we have a discussion about what it means to be an American, there will be no necessary agreement per se. But if we were attacked, let's suppose there were an attack on the United States, wouldn't we all fight for what we have here? Of course we would, and so, at some level, to the extent we have the ability. And so it's going back to Billy Joel's song, "You're the only one who knows," and so the collective unconscious is things we all know at some level, okay? and it drives us, and it's a very complex idea. But Jung was once asked, I think by Edward Edinger, what his myth was. Okay, now one thing that drives me crazy about Jungian psychology is they always want to talk about myth per se. Okay, I'd rather talk about educational stories than myth, because as soon as you say the word myth, it's not now, it's not about me. Okay, it's a myth, it's not real. That's what people react to the word myth. Okay, and so when Jungians keep talking among themselves, mutual masturbation, about myth, oh yeah, this is really cool, yeah. I mean, in Jungian psychology, there's this issue of, golly gee, these are amazing things this guy talked about. Yeah, they're really amazing things. But really, what was he driving at? That's what I'm interested in. Okay, and so he was asked by Edward Edinger what he thought his myth was. And he said, that's easy, that's the collective unconscious. So he stated expressly to one of the other famous Jungians that he felt his myth was the collective unconscious. It's a myth, it's a metaphor. It means something that is inexpressible, and yet somehow by circumambulating the center we can get to a generally agreed accepted idea of what he meant. Yes.
Your myth is an anti-myth.
Pardon?
Your myth is an anti-myth.
Well,
Fight against your own.
yeah, I mean, I certainly have a myth, and I understand everything that's said about myth, or I don't know if everything, but I know a lot of things about mythology because of both him and Joseph Campbell. But in terms of helping laymen understand what Jungian psychology is about, I don't think we're helped by using the term myth. And I don't think we're helped by using the term mythology.
Well,
Yeah, but a myth has a history. And the interesting thing I think about myth is that you can look back. I mean, especially some of the, gosh, it's been so long. But there's some women who studied mythology because they wanted to get back to a time that preceded the patriarchy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anyway, you start looking at mythology and you begin to see it changes over time.
Right.
The story changes.
Exactly.
And so if you look at myth as sort of a map of that psychic energy circulating through the machine,
Right.
then you begin to see that there's changes in the way consciousness emerges.
Well, and that's absolutely right. And this is what Eric Neumann says in the origins and history of consciousness. Okay, this was his magnum opus that he wrote during World War II. And he presented to the Jung Institute to be the first book that they published. Well, the Valkyries that were around Jung said, no, it can't be because it's 600 pages long. We can't publish a book that's 600 pages long as the first thing we publish. And so they didn't, but it was published very soon. It was published in the first year by the Jung Institute, and it came out in other places as well. But exactly what he was saying, which he's talking about, the origins of consciousness and how humans came to be awake and different from other creatures. And so you're absolutely right. I'm not saying that that is wrong or that we can't learn things from mythology. We certainly can. But in terms of getting the average layman to spend more than 15 minutes talking to you about Jungian psychology. Okay, so synchronicity is we'll take 5 more minutes. Synchronicity is non-causal connecting principle. It means that there wasn't a cause and effect, but 2 things happened at the same time. Who talked about a synchronicity just tonight? You did.
No,
Desiree?
it was,
Chad?
Chad, yeah.
And your synchronicity was?
It was hearing Jung mentioned in several podcasts.
Right, right, when you're coming to this class.
Right.
Okay, that's definitely a synchronicity.
Seems like
And
once you're aware of it, happens, you notice it happens all the time.
it does happen all the time, exactly. Synchronicity, I believe, also relates to divination techniques. Okay, now, a lot of people want to believe that divination is magic, woo-woo magic. And Dr. Jung was about what you can prove, okay? I mean, he was an empiricist. Okay, now what I can prove, I'm not going to do it soon, okay? But what I can prove is that tarot actually works, okay? But it works for a specific reason, and that is that the tarot is built on the archetypes, basically, and I can talk you all through that. And so I once made the assertion, and I think it's true, that I could go into a theater with 1,000 people, and I could simply throw the tarot deck across the stage and do a reading from that, and every person in the room would think that I had done the reading for them. But why? The reason is because of neurolinguistic programming, one thing, which is that if I say something about mother, maybe mother means something to you, to you, to you, and to you, but not to the others. But then if I say something about something else, then it'll mean something to the others. And so everyone will hear a different reading, is the point. But everyone is, what I say is, getting the furniture moved around in their psyche. And so, and that works in all divination. It works in tea reading and so on. Now, some of these, yeah, or in
How would
art.
that work in finding water, though?
Dowsing.
That's
Isn't that what you mean by divination?
No,
It's
no,
like fortune
Oh,
no.
telling.
I mean,
Well, that's
Or-
a form of divination.
It is.
Well, it is.
And people who do it would explain the same.
Sure,
Very
yeah.
similar.
There's like a,
They feel it, they sense it, they vibe
Yeah.
to it, they pick up.
and there's plenty of things going on in the world that we don't know about. For example, I have tinnitus, and I have tinnitus in at least 12 frequencies that I can identify. Now, the way I keep my sanity because of that tinnitus is because I say that is my carrier wave of the collective unconscious. And so, you know, I can believe to myself, you know, medicine doesn't know what tinnitus is. They don't know where it comes from, how it's heard, why, anything about it. But I can keep my sanity. You know, my ear, nose, and throat doctor says, well, just pretend it doesn't bother you, okay? I mean, that's
Easier said
medicine.
than done.
Right,
Well, you
okay.
figured it out, the way you're doing it.
Right,
As
and-
good as it gets.
Right, and so for me, it's my connection to the collective unconscious. Whether it's true or not, I have no idea, but it has meaning to me.
What about horses detecting a coming earthquake? Would that be a form of divination?
Yeah, sure. I mean, but that's really happening, obviously, and it's not only horses. Have you seen Welcome to Happiness, the movie? Has anybody else seen it? Oh, terrific movie. And it basically is talking about that. But I would urge you to get it on Netflix or on demand. Okay, now next week we are going to talk about A Dangerous Method.
A dangerous method.
Right.
Oh,
That's a movie. Have you seen it, Kathy?
no.
Okay. It's a movie about Jung, Freud, and Sabina Spielrein in the period 1907 to 1913. And so it's actually preliminary to the time when Jung did all of his writing. But there's a lot in there, and it's a contextual thing.
Is it easy to find?
Yes, you can get it on, certainly on Amazon or from On Demand. I think you can get it, I'm not sure you can get it on Demand, but you can definitely get it from Netflix or Amazon.